Hi everyone, and welcome to my no tech, no code, no demo, no slides even, session on SharePoint governance. So today I want to present to you about disruptive governance thinking for the masses. A lot of what I'm going to talk about today is based around the book that I wrote last year called the SharePoint Governance Manifesto. Feel free, if you like the content that we talk about today, to go and grab yourself a copy. I'd much appreciate that. That would be absolutely great. So my name's Clay, and I'm founder, CEO and Tumblr of Soulsailor Consulting. Soulsailor Consulting is a small micro consultancy, and we're very much focused on positively disrupting your technology projects in order to help you and facilitate you guys gaining maximum business value from your technology projects. We focus on a number of technologies: SharePoint, Yammer and Office 365, and our work is very much around the non-technical side of things. So we very much focus on SharePoint governance, requirements gathering, change management and user adoption. So today I'm going to talk to you about some practical ideas and thoughts around changing the way that you guys think about doing SharePoint governance. SharePoint governance is quite a dry topic. It's something that I guess a lot of you have some exposure to, but in a lot of cases I wonder whether really we're looking at SharePoint governance in the right way, and I guess really looking at it in a way that really suits the business and what we're trying to achieve. So first off, SharePoint. It's a fantastic platform. I love SharePoint. The amount of value that we can deliver from SharePoint is just phenomenal, and because of that we have a huge responsibility, I guess, to get things right. SharePoint's not cheap. Even if we're talking about SharePoint Online and subscription basis, it's still a financial investment that organisations have to think hard about, and we want to make sure that they get the value from it. And whether it's SharePoint or any other sort of technology, I really think that we've got a huge amount of, I guess, opportunity to deliver greatness. SharePoint, the technologies like SharePoint, Yammer and all of that, in my mind, are fantastic. So why is it that, I guess, in a lot of clients that I talk to, we find that although SharePoint is fantastic, our end users tend to be sad. Yeah? How often have we been into organisations where they're, on the edge of despair almost? Yeah? We don't want them to make that jump. We don't want them to stop using SharePoint, because SharePoint's a great platform. Yeah? We want people to not think there's something better out there. We want our clients and our customers to love SharePoint. Unhappy users is really not what we're trying to achieve. And the problem, I think, is that SharePoint projects are fundamentally failing. And they're not failing from a project plan perspective. If we think of a project plan with lots of tasks, and dependencies and links and all the rest of the stuff, our project plans, absolutely, from that point of view, we're winning. Yeah, from our projects, we are delivering SharePoint. Our end users are testing SharePoint. People are signing off to say, yep, SharePoint's been delivered. Thank you very much. But when we look at it 3, 6, 12 months down the line, is that investment in SharePoint, has that SharePoint project actually delivered value? Do we have happy customers, or do we have sad faces, people ready to jump off and go to IBM or SAP or some other vendor? The problem we've got is that business value isn't around project plans. And quite often what we'll find at the end of a project is that the user interface isn't great, so the users aren't adopting it. The value that we expected from the solution isn't quite what we anticipated. Although the users articulated their requirements to us, what we've delivered isn't actually what they were expecting or what they thought they wanted. Comes back to what Donald Rumsfeld said in a famous quote that there are unknown unknowns. There's stuff that our users don't know they don't know. Yeah? Is that where the real value of the platform is? So we have this problem. Yeah, we have a great technology that has fantastic opportunities for delivering value, and we have projects that are making our users unhappy. Now, why is this? Well, fundamentally, I think what it is that we almost have, from a project perspective, a map. And we start over here, and we have our goal over here. And we start the project, and the project plan, whether it's agile or waterfall, is our guide to delivering that project. And I think we get lost. I don't think we ever get to our goal. Our map may as well be useless. And I think this is because, we forget what we're delivering. And we forget why we're delivering. We forget that actually we're delivering for business users, for individuals, for people. That we're trying to achieve business value for an organisation. We're not just putting a technology in. And this kind of failure in delivering, I think, is something that I've coined the celery effect. I'm not very good at drawing celery, but let's imagine that's a stick of celery. Now, celery, albeit it's great for a diet if you want to lose a bit of weight, but celery is an interesting vegetable. The average stick of celery gives you around 8 calories. Okay, so if we eat the average stick of celery, we get 8 calories. So that's great. But the act of actually eating it, consuming that celery, actually takes away about 14 calories. Yeah? So we end up with a negative calorific, I'm not even sure whether that's a word, a negative calorific intake. Yeah, and again, negative calorific intake is a bad thing. Now if we think of this in terms of SharePoint projects, if we think about the value that we get, that's this 8 calories. And that's great, we've got some value from SharePoint, awesome. But actually, the 14 calories, the act of consuming that is really our project and our implementation. We have to pay for infrastructure and for licenses. We have to pay for projects and consultants. We often forget the time and the cost that it costs for us to get the business involved through requirements gathering, prioritisation, user testing, and the lack of productivity when we first roll a solution out. So all of those negatives, all of those costs, I think far outweigh the value that we're actually delivering from our SharePoint. Yeah? So in this case, our celery, our SharePoint celery, I guess, yeah, isn't a good thing. And we need to get to a point where our SharePoint projects are delivering more value than it's costing us to implement. And I think one of the key reasons that we end up with this SharePoint celery effect is that we don't have adequate governance. And that the governance that we have in place isn't necessarily enough. If we go back to our technology is great perspective, it is absolutely fantastic. The opportunities are huge. But if we think of a waste paper bin, I think SharePoint is rubbish. Now that might seem a bit harsh when I've already said that SharePoint is, and technology is, hugely valuable, but I think as a technology it knows nothing. So as far as SharePoint celery goes, as far as us delivering business value, SharePoint or any other technology may as well be chucked in the bin. Because out of the box, it's just a technology. It doesn't know what our business requirements are. SharePoint doesn't understand the legislation and the legal and the compliance issues that we've got to look at. It doesn't understand the demographics of our users. SharePoint as a technology is no good on its own. We spend far too much time talking about the technology and the features and trying to push those on our users, rather than thinking about the actual value that we're trying to get. Yeah? And we need to think better about that. Now, all in all, I don't see that any of this is a technology problem. Yeah? If I look at all of this, if I look at the platform, the lack of a map, SharePoint celery, all of these things don't, to me, indicate that we have a technology problem. What we have is a lack of governance, and we're looking at SharePoint and the delivery of value through the SharePoint platform in the wrong way. So technology isn't the solution. Telling the business what they should and shouldn't do isn't really the solution. So if governance, in my opinion, is the solution, or is certainly a key factor in the success of our SharePoint projects, then why haven't we implemented it before? What's the problem? Why are we not addressing governance correctly? If we think to the banks have a huge amount of governance. Lots and lots of governance, yeah? You can't do anything in a bank without hitting governance and governance challenges. But the banks hit problems a few years ago. Yeah, the banking crisis showed that although banks had governance, it wasn't necessarily the right governance. It didn't necessarily cover all of the right things. So, as with our SharePoint projects, I think we have governance, but not necessarily all the right governance. Not necessarily the governance we actually need. So, we want to try and avoid being a bank. The banks all had catastrophic problems because the governance they had wasn't sufficient. And we need to try and avoid that. That's not a good situation to be in. So we need to think again about what governance really is. Now, if you look at Wikipedia, if you look at the Microsoft literature, governance quite often gets defined as being a set of processes and rules that control your solution. Now, although I kind of agree with that to some level, that absolutely you do need rules, you do need processes in order to govern your platform and the technology and SharePoint in general, I don't think that's the whole thing. I don't think that's sufficient. SharePoint governance, to me, is something quite different to just rules and processes. It's not about some guy with a sheriff badge and a cowboy hat telling you what to do and ruling the roost. If you look deeper within the Wikipedia article about governance, you'll find that what it says is that governance is to steer. Okay, let's think about that. To steer. Steering, to me, doesn't sound like all it's on about is telling you which way to go. Steering is a dynamic way. If we think about driving, when we're steering the car to our destination, we go around potholes. Yeah, if there's a traffic jam, hopefully our sat-nav's going to steer us around that and take us on a quicker route. I love to sail. It's probably one of the reasons I called the company Soul Sailor Consulting. And in sailing, we steer. And I think it's a fantastic analogy. If we think that maybe we're going to, as an organisation, we're going to try and steer to a magic place, and that magic place happens to be a tropical island. And on that tropical island, as with all good tropical islands, we should have a palm tree. Now, this vision, this destination that we're trying to sail to, this tropical island, a couple of coconuts, yeah? I do like coconuts. Yeah? This destination that we're trying to get to, as far as I'm concerned, is in effect our vision. Yeah, it's the vision for our platform, even for our project. Now we, as either sailors or people that are driving in a car or from a SharePoint project, are starting off our journey way down here. Let's draw ourselves a little boat. Okay? Let's consider this boat as our SharePoint project. And as far as our project's concerned, we're trying to get to this destination. Now, with all good things, we need wind to blow us into our sails in order to get us to that destination. And let's make an assumption that the wind's coming in this direction. Now, for anybody that knows about sailing, we can't sail our boat directly into the wind. The sails will flap and we'll get nowhere. So we have to steer a zigzag course in order to get up to our vision, up to our island. Maybe something like that. So that's all very well and straightforward. We have our project, our boat, we have a destination, and we're going to try and steer our way towards it. But what often happens in these cases is we come across obstacles. Yeah? Maybe we come across some rocks. Obviously we don't want to sail into those rocks. If we do that, that's going to break the boat and we're definitely not going to get to our vision. So what do? We change course. We steer around the rocks. And during the course of our sailing, we may steer around lots and lots of obstacles. And from a SharePoint perspective, those obstacles could be anything. It could be a change in the financial position of your project. You need to save money. We've got more money to spend. Sometimes that happens. It could be another project is diverting resources. It could be that the vision has changed. It could be that the requirements during the project have emerged and changed. Whatever those changes are, we're going to have to steer in order to continue and make it up here towards our vision, towards our goal. And that's our goal for the project, our goal for the platform, the SharePoint platform itself, and ultimately the goal and the vision for the organisation. And what I see governance as being is it's helping us sail our project boat towards our vision. And we're stopping ourselves sailing off in the wrong direction. You know, we all know the world is flat, and if we sail off in that direction, eventually we're going to fall off the edge of the world. It stops us from sailing in the right direction and taking a wrong turn and going in the opposite direction, completely in the wrong way. SharePoint governance, in my mind, is all around us steering, it's all around us steering towards our vision. So in my opinion, SharePoint vision is the most important thing to think about when you're starting to look at governance. And that might seem strange because visions quite often are very woolly. But I think if you look at defining a SharePoint vision, and there's loads of great tools and techniques that you can use for this, if you define a really clear vision, then everything you do, every single step, every single process, every requirement, everything in your project, as long as it's taking you towards your vision, then you're on the right lines. You're going in the right direction. And I think that's a great way of kind of being a check and balance to make sure that we're progressing in the right direction. We need that. Without that, we are going to sail off the end of the world. We are going to be going backwards and going in the wrong direction and delivering something that our business users, remember at the start, those people that we're trying to make happy, we're going to end up not delivering that. So this is why I think that to steer is a really fundamental and critical thing to get in clear in your minds so that you understand what SharePoint governance is. Because this vision, is your nirvana. You know, it is kind of the sunset that we're trying to get to. Yeah? If we can get to that vision, then we have well and truly achieved. And that's what I want to kind of get across to you today, is what do we need to think about from a SharePoint governance perspective to make sure that every time we do a SharePoint project, every change we make, everything we do gets us closer and closer towards that vision. So the first thing I want to do is list out my approach to SharePoint governance. And it's a holistic approach that covers 7 areas. Now if we think about what you may already know about, so the discussions and the context and the content that, say, Microsoft and a lot of good people put out there around SharePoint governance, it tends to hit 2 or 3 areas. There tends to be the technology governance. Technology governance are all around making sure that our servers don't fall down. And absolutely, I would never say we shouldn't have that. Absolutely, we need that. But I don't think it's the only thing we need. And more organisations are starting to talk about information governance. And again, fundamental, absolutely fundamental, but it's not everything. And occasionally people start talking also about application governance. So how do we govern the deployment of new functionality in our platform? Again, it's important, but really, is that all governance should be? If we just cover those things, the infrastructure, our information, and the deployment of new functionality, do we think that's going to stop us going off the end of the world or going backwards? In my view, no. In my view, that still gives us far too much opportunity for derailing our projects and going in the wrong direction. So I've come up with what I call the 7 waves of SharePoint governance. So as you've gathered, I love sailing, I love water. So the 7 waves of SharePoint governance are, I guess, what you would call a way of starting to think about SharePoint governance. And starting to think about how SharePoint governance should be done and what it entails and the areas that it should cover. And SharePoint governance isn't something necessarily that's logical to everybody. Sometimes it can feel a little bit illogical, and I appreciate that. But the 7 waves hopefully will show you the 7 areas that you can focus on to make sure your governance is steering you in the right direction. So I'm going to go through these 7 waves very briefly, just to give you an idea of the sort of areas that I think you guys should be focusing on in order to deliver proper, good SharePoint business value and to properly govern your solution. The first one is information governance. Now, information governance is an easy one. We're all probably doing some level of information governance. And I won't number these because the reality is I don't mind what order you approach these in as long as you approach all of these angles in your SharePoint governance plans. So information governance, key thing. And I cover within information governance both information architecture and information management. Information architecture, the metadata, your taxonomy, site structure, all of those kind of things. And information management is really around security and the processes, site provisioning, all of those good things. So information governance is a critical aspect of your SharePoint governance. The other one is IT assurance. Now, IT assurance is probably something that most of you have got covered, hopefully to a greater or lesser degree. Now, I don't call IT assurance governance because governance is this concept of steering. We're steering our way to our vision. So the direction we can take can vary. With IT assurance, either our infrastructure is fit for purpose or it isn't. So it's very much more of a yes, it's working, no, it's not adequate. So it's an assurance as opposed to governance. This is really covering a number of areas. It's covering the infrastructure, it's covering DR and backup, but it's also covering the technology aspects. Which features are you switching on in your SharePoint farms? Are you just switching everything on? We all know that's, or hopefully we all know that's not a good thing. Or are you just switching on the things that you need in order to get to this vision? So IT assurance is a critical area and basically covers the technology aspects of your SharePoint implementation. The next one I want to talk about very briefly is business alignment. Now this is really just a concept of making sure that in everything you do, you can consider the business. When I look at SharePoint projects, one of the things that really strikes me that I think we lose track of, maybe this is one of the reasons our SharePoint maps don't work so well, is that every single thing we do in SharePoint significantly affects an end user. So say we're just doing a simple solution, we're replacing file shares and we're implementing a document library in an average organisation, 1,000 people. We're fundamentally changing the way 1,000 people work. And to me, that's a huge deal. We've got to freaking get that right, because if those 1,000 people are put off, if we slow them down, if we hamper them in doing their job and for them to get to their vision, they're not going to adopt it. So business alignment is critical to make sure that everything that we do, every step we take, every document we write, every feature we switch on, every requirement we try and deliver, we need to make sure that it's aligned to the organisation and the business and the SharePoint vision. Fundamental. The next one I want to talk very briefly about is project governance. Now, most of you have probably got some kind of project methodology that you're using for your SharePoint projects. Most of you will probably think you've got that nailed, and I hope you have. Project governance is really there just to make sure that everybody in your organisation that is involved in your project is doing it in a consistent way and in an aligned way that helps you get towards your vision. Now, I'd recommend that this was an agile project methodology. Now, waterfall doesn't work, and I'll talk about a few other reasons why waterfall doesn't work, in my opinion, in a bit. But making sure that you've got the right project governance and that it supports what you're trying to do in an iterative and in a sustainable way is very important. Make sure that it works for what you're trying to achieve. The next one I want to talk about is a Japanese word. Japanese word called Kaizen. Now, Kaizen means continuous improvement. Continuous improvement, I think, is a fundamental building block, I guess, of SharePoint business value. If we get Kaizen embedded in our governance and in the way that we're delivering our projects, then we're onto a good thing. Kaizen's around making sure that we can stay adaptive, we can stay agile in the organisation. As the vision changes, as different requirements come into place, as different problems and challenges arise, Kaizen, doing things in a continuous improvement way, small iterations delivering positive business value, Kaizen allows us to navigate these waves, navigate our way to our vision effectively. If we have a 6-month requirements gathering phase and a 10-month delivery phase, I can guarantee that the vision will have changed, the requirements will have changed. And that first implementation that you do, your users will not like it. No matter how well you've delivered your requirements and gathered the requirements, no matter how well you've branded your solution, there will be a substantial number of people that don't like your SharePoint implementation. Because when they get to use it, they'll understand better what their requirements are, and then they'll be able to articulate them better to you, and therefore you'll be able to develop a better solution. Dave Snowden covers this in a thing called the Cynefin framework, which I won't talk about today, but it's a really interesting way of understanding why our SharePoint and business projects are complex. They're not complicated, they're complex, and therefore the requirements and the way we approach them is emergent. But that's for another session, another day. Next thing I want to talk about is change management and user adoption. Change management. Now, who out there is ever doing any proper change management with their SharePoint projects? A lot of people, when I mention use change management, often say, well, yeah, we do change management when we have big business change projects. When we're reorganising the company. If we think back to what I said a few minutes ago, SharePoint is fundamentally changing the way our people are working. And especially when you're implementing your SharePoint platform as a strategic platform across the whole of your organisation, then change management is absolutely appropriate. Change management means we're managing change into the business. User adoption is in effect the way that we then allow our business users to use the solution effectively to reach their vision and their goals. So you can see change management is very important. If we don't have that, if we don't think about how we're going to embed change and we're going to work with the business to help them achieve their vision, then our solution's going to fail and we're going to get back to that SharePoint celery scenario. We don't want to be eating SharePoint celery. It doesn't taste nice. The last thing I want to talk about in the 7 waves of SharePoint governance is social business. Now, there's a reason why social business is a wave on its own as opposed to just something around features. A lot of organisations I talk to say, well, we're not a social organisation, we're not doing that social thing. But what I'll always say to them is that although now you may not be doing social business, although now you may not be turning on the social features, you may not be adopting Yammer, you may not be enabling Yammer feeds, you may not be using discussions, my sites, tagging, all of these great things. But you as a business, up there at the CEO level, I'm sure they're having those conversations and discussions around how the organisation can be more social. Because businesses across the globe are working more collaboratively, breaking down both internal silos but also organisational silos and starting to work more with other businesses. So I see social business as the opportunity for you to challenge the business as to whether you need to be adopting the tools and the technologies that we have within SharePoint to work more socially. But also to start thinking about you as a business. How should you be working with your partners and your customers? So including social business, I think, helps equip you, your SharePoint platform and your projects for future. Because undoubtedly more and more social aspects are going to be coming into your SharePoint projects. So now's the time to start thinking about them. Even if you do nothing now, have that conversation. So those are the 7 waves of SharePoint governance. And for me, I think if we can address each one of these 7 in whatever order, I don't care about the order particularly, but if we address all of these, then that is going to stop us going off and delivering things that we shouldn't be delivering. And that is absolutely going to get us up to our vision. And we're going to be happy, and we're going to have happy business users. A lot of organisations try and kind of shortcut this. If we think about what I said earlier, Microsoft have very good IT assurance. They are starting to talk about information governance. And I'm not really sure where the application governance would come, maybe within project governance or change management. It's kind of a mix of those things. But if we think, what happens if we miss some of these? And this is a reason why I think we have a holistic view of governance, covering all of these 7 areas, and not just, I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do this, then I'm going to do the other. If we don't have IT assurance, that's really easy. No IT assurance, servers fall down, end users get fed up. If we don't have information governance, people can't find our content. We're not getting the value out of our most important assets, our people and the information within our organisation. So we have poor user adoption. If we're not implementing an approach of Kaizen, what happens? We stop iterating. We stop looking at what we've delivered and improving it. So as things change, as obstacles come up within our business and our projects, we're reacting, and we're reacting badly and in a costly way. If we don't get people using our solutions, if change management and user adoption is missed off, then our users aren't going to be using it. They're going to go back to email. We don't want that. We want email used to be reducing. We don't want people sending attachments. We want people using SharePoint for what it's good at. So this is why I think we should use all of these elements in a holistic manner to sufficiently and effectively govern our SharePoint projects so they meet their vision. So I hope that makes sense. Now, a lot of organisations, a lot of people I talk to kind of get that, yeah? But what I have had conversations and people saying is, well, you know, I'm a financial services organisation, or, you know, we only have 200 people, or I'm a global pharmaceuticals organisation, or a global brewery, or a global financial services organisation. How do I implement these 7 waves in an effective way? There must be different approaches. And I think the reality is, whether you're a small business or a large business, I don't personally think it matters. In my opinion, looking at how governance is implemented in both small organisations and global ones, I think they all have the same approach. Now, it might be that a global organisation has outsourced all its IT and has got IT assurance off and sorted. That's fine. And it might be that a small business is really, really good at social business because it has to be in order to survive. But in order to achieve our vision, we need to address all 7. Whether you're a global or small organisation, we need to look at all 7 areas. So I think, you know, does size matter with SharePoint governance? No, it doesn't. Do the 7 waves apply to you, whatever size of project, whatever type of project, whatever type of organisation? Absolutely. The fundamental thing is address all of these areas. Make sure that your governance ticks off all of these. And I often work with clients to do a governance audit, and we take each one of these and look at, you know, on a big whiteboard, a big piece of paper and post-it notes, you know, what do people have in place? What does the organisation have in place in all of these areas? How do all of these areas align with the vision that they've defined? And yeah, quite often visions can be quite woolly, but I like to define visions in terms of the difference it's going to make to you as an organisation. So if you can articulate, big or small as an organisation, the difference that your SharePoint project will make for your business and your users and your customers, then quite easily you should be able to map to, okay, what governance do we have in place in all of these areas that supports that? Where are we missing things? What do we need? Now, so far I've talked very much, I guess, around the conceptual ways of thinking about SharePoint governance. And a lot of you will probably be thinking, well, that's all well and good, but, you know, in the office, SharePoint governance doesn't look like, you know, 7 waves. SharePoint governance doesn't look like, you know, a vision statement. Now, I'm guessing that most of you that are thinking that are really starting to think about SharePoint governance as you've got it today. And I'm betting SharePoint governance for a lot of you is a hefty document. Now, absolutely, SharePoint governance does need to be documented. I'd love to say that there was a way around this. I'd love to say that actually we don't need to document the SharePoint governance anymore because, yeah, Ant's got a fantastic new way of doing it. The reality is, for the moment, certainly, we need some form of documentation around SharePoint governance. And although it's a bit of a shame, it is the reality. The other thing I think we need, and that, yeah, for reference, I think there's 3 areas. First is documented governance. We need it. I'll talk about it in a little bit more detail in a second. The second thing we need is our governance structures. Most organisations will have some form of governance board. Some people that make governance decisions. Yeah, quite often I find it's a strategic board that meets once a month or once a quarter, more likely. Yeah, and they talk about big things, and then occasionally they'll talk about SharePoint governance as well, and governance that affects SharePoint. Yeah, so we need boards, governance And the last thing I think we need, in order to make our SharePoint governance stick and be sustainable within our organisation, is what I call in-place governance. Now this is the governance that is implemented and really is kind of almost your day-to-day governance. Now if I go through these three areas in a little bit more detail, the documented SharePoint governance is, I guess, straightforward. You know, it needs to cover these 7 areas. If it doesn't cover the 7 areas, then you've missed something. The reality is, in most organisations, this SharePoint governance document, 50, 70, 500 pages, whatever it is one big hefty document that nobody ever reads, gathers dust on a shelf somewhere. Now if we structure our governance documentation across these areas, we can start targeting the right areas at the right audiences. So suddenly your governance document becomes several governance documents. Even better, it becomes a governance wiki with kind of signposted routes depending on the audience, depending on who you're targeting it at. Now everybody that has any interest in your SharePoint governance needs to understand what the vision is. So it's important in your governance to have that documented. And then, well, if you're the project manager, then you're going to be interested in the vision. You're probably going to be interested around business alignment, project governance, and some of these other areas. If you're a techie, you have to understand the vision. You need to know what you're trying to achieve. Yeah? And you'll need to know maybe the IT assurance. And potentially you'll want to know something about information governance, so you can understand what you need to do with the metadata and the term stores and things like that. So if we have 7 areas of SharePoint governance and our vision documented, we can start to target the documentation at the right audiences, making it digestible, making it relevant to the right audiences. So people are going to read it. People are going to engage with it. People will, in a spirit of Kaizen, improve it and ask questions about it, which is great. Now from a governance board's perspective, most organisations historically that I've gone into have had one governance board, the strategic SharePoint governance board, that sits once a quarter and makes those big ass decisions around what SharePoint should do. You know, do we switch on records management? We've got the intranet needs revamping. Should we put that on SharePoint? So there's big strategic decisions, and that's great. But I think governance and governance structures should operate in 3 ways. The 3 ways that I think they should operate are strategic. Pen's run out. Let's try another one. Strategic, operational, and what I call kind of day-to-day. The strategic is the kind of board that I've already discussed, the board that makes those big decisions. Operational should probably meet more like monthly, and you may have operational boards maybe across the 7 waves, so you may have 7 different operational boards, some covering information, some covering the technology, some making sure that we're making the best use of the platform, people reviewing the project. Yeah, so we can take these waves and almost map them onto governance boards. Absolutely, only have the ones that make sense. Only have governance boards that you need. Don't overcomplicate things. But I think we need these 3 levels. And the 3rd level is this day-to-day. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a second. But I think at the day-to-day level, we should have somebody, some people within the organisation that can manage the minor governance foibles. When we need to add a new term to a term set that doesn't have a huge strategic impact. When people want to understand which kind of site template to use. Things that can't wait for an operational or a strategic meeting, that need to be dealt with as soon as possible, but have very little ongoing and big impact. They're not going to break things. So I think if we can put in 3 levels of strategic, 3 levels of governance boards, strategic, operational and day-to-day, then I think we can pretty much manage across these 7 areas and achieving this vision and governance goals. And the last one is this in-place governance. In-place governance is a mix of, I think, kind of technology, but also people. So I think it's really great if within your SharePoint solution you can actually embed governance. If you've got a My Site quota, then somewhere on your My Site, make it very clear to the users what the usage scenario should be for a My Site and how much content they can put up there and why. If you've enabled Yammer, then say why, say what it's used for, say what it replaces. So getting in place within your solution and telling people what it does and why it does it, I think helps you align your solution to the vision, but it also helps with change management. It also helps with Kaizen. Because you're telling the end users why the solution is structured as it is, why that impacts the business, and helping them understand what you've done. I'm sure we've all been kind of sat in front of a technology for the first time and we just don't know how to use it or what to use it for. Yeah? Having this approach, having in-place governance embedded within your technology solution, yeah, targeted at the business users, helps to change that. And the other part of this is a thing that I'd like to talk about in a little bit more detail. And the third real way of embedding governance in your organisation is a SharePoint Centre of Excellence. If we think about what we've talked about so far, yeah, we've got the document, hopefully in a wiki, hopefully targeted at lots of users. That's great. We've got strategic governance boards, yeah, making those big decisions. We've got operational governance boards, looking after the interests of the business units or countries or areas or governance areas, whatever is appropriate. And we've got the day-to-day governance being covered by both in-place governance within your solution and a SharePoint Centre of Excellence. Now, SharePoint Centre of Excellence is really just a kind of fancy name for your SharePoint team. If we think of SharePoint in the middle, and the new logo is just so much easier to draw on a whiteboard. And we have our people around it, our SharePoint team. Now there's a number of roles. I can't say now, you know, how big your SharePoint team should be. There's lots and lots of different factors. I go into a little bit of detail within the book, but you know, you need to get a SharePoint team that's appropriate for you. This is your SharePoint Centre of Excellence. SharePoint. Now, some of the roles that I think you should have within the SharePoint Centre of Excellence, so your technical architects, your business analysts, end user trainers, all of those people that can add value and are outwardly facing towards the business, because the business are really what we're trying to engage with. Now, the business, I'll put the business in green because the business is good. The business need to understand how they can engage with SharePoint and the SharePoint team around change management, user adoption, Kaizen, business alignment, and really all of the other areas as well. So you want to have in place a route of communication and engagement from the SharePoint team out to your users, but also from your users into your SharePoint Centre of Excellence. Because the SharePoint Centre of Excellence is going to be the Centre of Excellence that through their project governance and through Kaizen are going to have the sprint plans. Yeah, they're going to know what features they're going to be rolling out when. They're going to be knowing why they are. They're going to be knowing what this vision is and what they need to implement from a SharePoint perspective to get there. But day to day, we need to be engaging with that SharePoint Centre of Excellence. It needs to be an open form of communication to allow these people, both sides of the team, to engage together. Because if we, as people using the solution and creating the solution, work together, we can really, really embed SharePoint governance in the organisation. We can really drive this vision and achieve it. And that really is how we maximise our SharePoint value. Yeah? We address all these 7 areas of SharePoint governance, and we create the structures through content, through in place within the solution, through governance boards and through people to make sure that what we're delivering achieves this vision. So the SharePoint Centre of Excellence is very much a business-focused team, ideally autonomous and not reporting into IT, but again, that's a subject for discussion elsewhere. But as long as we've got open communications and open channels, then this team can really drive a huge amount of value. This team and its extended team of the SharePoint users out there can really make sure that the SharePoint platform works and that we definitely don't eat any SharePoint celery for our lunch. And there's a further aspect to this kind of scenario, this open communication, this dialogue and really supporting Kaizen that I want to talk a little bit more about. Amongst these people, we've all heard of, you know, your change champions and your SharePoint champions and the people that technically know SharePoint really well that are out here in your business. But there's another group of people that I'd like to tell you about. It's this guy here. And it's this woman here. In fact, let's draw them as people, because they are very important. So, within your business, I think there are some key people that we're, I guess, not really looking for and not really thinking about. These people are called tumblers. Let me just write that down for you. Tumblers are, well, tumbler basically comes from a Yiddish word, and tumblers are the people at a Jewish wedding that make sure that the whole wedding party are having fun and enjoying themselves. It's the tumbler's role to make sure that if the bride and groom want you to drink lots and eat lots and have great fun, they're the people that encourage that. They're the people that don't sit down, they carry on dancing, eating and drinking until everybody's up and enjoying themselves. Now what relevance does a tumbler, an old German word, yeah, and somebody that has fun in a party, what does that have relevance to SharePoint? Well, I'll tell you, these tumblers are key in your SharePoint project. You can't allocate them. I can't say that you are a tumbler. You may not be. You may be a power user. You may be just a normal user getting on with their job. That's fine. Tumblers are the people that actually use the SharePoint platform in a way that you would as a project team. So you have in your mind a set of behaviours, a set of ways of working that you expect for people to help achieve the vision. You know that you don't want people to email attachments, you want them to use SharePoint. You know that you want people to start documenting tacit knowledge within Yammer feeds, tagging content. You want people following formal processes using workflow within your solution. These people, the tumblers, are the people that all the time are using the solution in the way that you want to. And you want to support these guys. These guys are really important. So you want to open up a kind of two-way dialogue once you've identified them. And make sure that they're supported. Because they're going to tell their colleagues. They're going to get annoyed when their colleagues send them an attachment. And they're going to tell them and point them in the right direction. So if these people are amplifying good behaviours within your solution, then to some extent it's like in-place governance. These people are doing it for you. They are massively, massively important to your SharePoint project. Yeah, they're like a positive virus. Yeah, if we can get tumblers working in a way that you want them to work within your SharePoint project, then we're going to be rapidly approaching our vision. We're going to be almost self-imposing our governance. And that's got to be a good thing. That's what we're looking for. So that's the end of the talk. I hope you've enjoyed it. I hope you've liked my no-tech no coding, no demo, no slides approach. I hope it worked for you. Don't forget, the 7 waves are information governance, IT assurance, business alignment, project governance, Kaizen, change management and user adoption, and social business. And if you enjoyed what you've seen here, and if you want to get a clearer vision for your SharePoint project, then feel free to purchase a copy of the SharePoint Governance Manifesto or get in touch with me for more ideas around how you can achieve your SharePoint vision. Thank you very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed it. See you again soon. Thanks.